Rome might have fallen in 476 AD, but that was not the end for the Romans. To the east, Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire, or as many call them today, the Byzantine Empire, carried on for another 1,000 years, preserving much of what we know today of the ancient Romans, upholding their imperial institutions, and, what matters the most for us coin collectors, they kept striking lots and lots of coins. In the English language, to say something is Byzantine means to say something is highly complex, intricate, maybe to an excess. And let me tell you, the field of Byzantine numismatics is very complex. So for this video, we're having a small taste of Byzantine coins. In particular, their earliest bronze coins, which are very common and super easy to collect. Let's explore the time period immediately after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, when the imperial monetary system was completely chaotic, just like everything else at that time, and desperately needing to be reformed. Let's see when what we call the late Roman monetary system came to an end and the new, separate Byzantine coinage started. And of course, we will illustrate this with a whole bunch of interesting coins. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Okay, let's go back in time to the year 491 AD. The Western Roman Empire has recently collapsed. To the east, a man called Anastasius became emperor at Constantinople. He was not a man of noble blood. In fact, for decades before his ascension to emperor, he worked as a manager in the imperial Ministry of Finance. So many years working with the imperial administration gave Anastasius a clear view of the problems and inefficiencies that plagued this massive and complicated empire. The monetary system was dysfunctional after years of inflationary reforms and economic problems, economic collapse, we could say, with only two coins being commonly found in circulation. The minute numus, a copper coin weighing less than a gram, of such small value that any transactions required bags full of them. 20 of them were needed to buy a small loaf of bread, for example. And, on the other hand, the highly valuable gold solidus, which served as a store of value and the empire's only stable form of currency. Due to a series of factors that I won't enter in today, silver became very rare, so a major gap between the solidus and the numus formed, with 7,200 numi being required in exchange for a single solidus. Taxation during that time was heavy and inefficient. Since the monetary system was so degraded, many citizens preferred to pay their taxes in kind with the goods they produced. This resulted in a considerable part of the goods collected being lost to spoilage, which in turn forced the emperor to raise the taxes even more to compensate for this spoilage, resulting in unreasonably high taxes over the common people. Some other types of taxes had to be paid in coin, and these had their share of problems as well, with corruption being rampant and a very interesting problem. There were irregular taxing intervals, resulting in some ridiculous situations like certain taxes only being collected every 4 years, like the Chrysargyron, a tax on artisans, craftsmen, and merchants. This tax was calculated based on an empire-wide census. It took into consideration a person's property, what they worked on, the volume of business, its profitability. So smaller businesses like small workshops, local commerce, small farms trying to sell their excess production were particularly vulnerable when it was time to pay that tax, being hit with a super heavy bill every 4 years and having to scramble to liquidate some of their assets or empty their savings to pay for that massive sum of money that all of a sudden they owned. There are records of some cities organizing local collection systems in which fractions of the payment would be paid in smaller intervals across these 4 years. Basically, they found a local solution to the state's incompetence in tax collecting and unwillingness to change due to sheer institutional inertia. When he was just a manager in the imperial bureaucratic machine, there was no way Anastasius could enact the changes he saw necessary to the tax system. Well, but now that he was emperor, however, he could. He abolished the Chrysargyron and reformed the tax code in a way that made more sense and didn't generate these inconveniences. His reforms managed the miracle of reducing the tax burden on the average Roman while increasing total tax revenue for the imperial coffers. It's actually quite amusing how this situation lays bare some of the timeless realities of power. What is the best way of running a state? Have the power be diluted between multiple people and risk having the administration be bogged down with inefficiencies and inertia, which results in a less effective government and less prosperity? Or should we concentrate power on a single individual or a very small circle capable of enacting real change quickly, but exposing everyone to the risks of this power ending up in the hands of an individual of questionable morals, maybe? History has been gentle with Anastasius. He seemed to have been a good guy with benign intentions, and he left the empire in a better state than he found it. He was apparently the kind of man you could trust with absolute power. Sadly, it feels like for every Anastasius in history, there are like 5 or 10 Caligulas or Neros. Alright, back to his coin reform. What about the problem of coinage? Our new financially literate emperor understood that in order to make the economy work properly and to once again ensure a stable flow of taxes to the imperial coffers, coins had to be the only way of conducting transactions in the empire once again. So he reformed the coinage and the tax system in the year 498. No more taxation in kind, no more barter economy. He even reformed the way the army acquired its equipment. Instead of providing each soldier with the equipment they needed, which came from state-controlled factories, a cash bonus was given to the soldier, and he was supposed to procure his own equipment. Maybe Anastasius understood a fully free market was more efficient in providing the soldiers equipment compared to a state-run business. Anastasius did not touch the gold and silver denominations. The solidus was already the most prestigious gold coin of late antiquity, and it would continue to be struck until the end of the 11th century. There was no sense in touching something that was so prestigious and so high quality. Fractions of the solidus also existed. The semicis, worth half a solidus, and the tremicis, worth a third. The tremicis was particularly popular in Europe during the early Middle Ages. Its smaller size, a little over 1.5 grams of gold, was a much more practical amount of money, and it was much more usable in commerce, even though it was still a considerable sum of cash, with lots of imitations being made by these new kingdoms of Western Europe in the centuries following the fall of Rome. Silver, as I mentioned, was rare, but silver coins still existed. The siliqua, a silver piece of around 2.25 modern grams, was worth 1/24th of a solidus. Halves and thirds of a siliqua also existed, but once again they constituted an insignificant part of the coins in circulation. And then we get to the focus of this episode, bronze. By far the most common coins found in circulation and the main focus of his reform. Gone were the days of counting tiny bronze coins to buy something as cheap as a loaf of bread. A new system, with multiple different denominations and with their value clearly marked on the coin, was introduced. The reform was carried out in 2 steps. One in 498, which was not well received by the population as the coins were considered too light, and another one in 512, which substantially increased the amount of bronze in each coin. This one was well accepted by the people. I will simplify some of my explanations a little bit for the sake of efficiency, although I think this episode is going to be super long. But anyways, a new unit of account was created, the numus. Yes, it had the same name as the old tiny bronze coin, but this was a brand new unit. One gold solidus was worth 14,400 numi. Multiples of the numus were created to make transactions more practical, with the most common ones being 40, 20, 10, and 5 numi coins. Some other denominations existed, like different multiples of the numi, like 16, 12, 30. However, the 40, 20, 10, 5 set was by far the most common. The iconography on the coins also changed. First, a little bit, then a lot as the years passed. On the obverse, we typically have the image and the regnal name of the emperor. At first, following an artistic style similar to what was found in late Roman coins, and later evolving into new, typically Byzantine style. The more dramatic changes were in the reverse. At the center, we now have always a clear mark of the denomination, a number, which could be in Latin or Greek numerals, depending on where the coin was made. And around the denominational number, the mint mark and other pieces of information, such as the regnal year, different types of control marks. It depended on the issue. How about we start looking at some coins to illustrate what I'm just saying? Let's begin with a 40 numi coin, also called a follis, from Anastasius himself. As we can see, quite a large, substantial coin, very different to the pathetic little numi the Romans were used to at that time. These early Byzantine portraits of the emperor are still very Roman in style. You could look at coins from 100, 150 years before this one was made, and they would have been remarkably similar. The most obvious difference is, well, how massive this one is. Here we have the emperor wearing a diadem on his head, and he wears his cloak with a jeweled fibula on his shoulder, keeping the cloak in place. And the legends read, Dominus Noster Anastasius Perpetuus Augustus. The legends are also very similar to what was put on late Roman coins, and here we can see how remarkably different the late empire was to the stereotypical idea of classical Rome. The late empire, starting in the 4th, but particularly during the 5th and 6th centuries, was an absolutist monarchy, no questions asked. Any remnants of republicanism were mostly ceremonial. It's blatantly clear when we read the legends, when we translate the legends. Dominus Noster, our Lord. The emperor was your lord, not the first citizen, as the older coins would used to say. And he was Perpetuus Augustus, perpetual. Power was his, and it was permanent. On the reverse, the design is dominated by that massive Greek letter mu. The Greeks used letters to represent numbers, so this was the number 40. But why use Greek numbers if on the obverse we just saw the legends written in Latin? Well, if we look at the mint mark under the letter, we see the number con. So this coin was minted in Constantinople, so in the eastern, Greek-speaking part of the empire. Coins struck in areas with a Latin-speaking majority would have used Latin numbers, so in this case it would have been 4x's. This is quite an early issue, so we don't have an indication for the regnal year of the emperor. Instead, we have a series of control marks, a cross at the top, 2 stars, and the letter gamma, equivalent to the number 3. This was likely the workshop number where this coin was made. An important mint like Constantinople would have had multiple different workshops operating at the same time. We can appreciate the utilitarian nature of these new coins. Previously, the reverse was reserved for some sort of imperial propaganda, but here it's all straight to the point. How much the coin is worth, where it was made, the control marks meant to allow the imperial authorities to track this coin issue in case there was some sort of irregularity. Everything was very functional. Now, before moving to smaller denominations, let's look at another follis. This one was struck under Emperor Justin II in 565, and it illustrates well how shortly after the reform of Anastasius, we start seeing a change in the style of Byzantine coins. Now we have a clear stylistic separation from anything done previously in the West. Facing portraits become the norm, and the overall image of the emperor changes as well. His clothes change. We now see a monarch wearing a crown rather than a diadem. He looks a lot more like one would expect from a medieval king rather than an emperor, although by the time this coin was made, he was still called Augustus, so emperor. There's also an abandonment of any non-Christian iconography. As we can see here, we have the images of Justin II and his wife, Sophia, sitting by his side. He holds a globe cruciger, while Sophia carries a scepter. They're both crowned and sitting on their thrones, and around the portrait, the legends are still in Latin and show the old imperial formula. Dominus Noster, Justinus Perpetuus Augustus. The reverse continues with the utilitarian style we saw earlier. We have the large mu letter, so 40 numi, under it the mint mark for Constantinople, and the letter epsilon representing the number 5, so the 5th workshop of the Constantinople mint. And now we have a date on the coin. Before the widespread adoption of the Gregorian calendar we use today, time was often counted using regnal years, so the years since a monarch assumed the throne. This is what we have on the left side, the Latin word anno, meaning year, and on the right, the number 1, meaning this coin was struck in the first year of Justin II's reign, 565. Okay, let's start going down the denomination ladder. Here is a half follis of the one and only Justinian the Great. This example was struck in Antioch in 563 AD. So this was made right at the end of Justinian's super long reign of nearly 40 years. Now, that is an outstanding portrait. Look at that. The planchet this coin was struck on is relatively short, so sadly the legends were left offline, but the portrait at least is very well preserved. Here we can see the new style of portrait, showing the front-facing emperor. Justinian wears a mix of imperial regalia and military attire. He wears a military cuirass. We can see the wavy pattern on his chest area, which I suspect is an attempt to show a lorica squamata, type of scale armor that was popular in late antiquity. He holds a globe cruciger on one hand, and there's a cross to his right. Over his head, we have the imperial crown, and look how curious. At the very top of his crown, there's some type of crest. It's hard to see in this example, but I'm pretty sure it was on the die this coin was made with. I'm putting a drawing to illustrate it better. This crest is a remnant of an older Roman design, where the emperor is also shown front-facing, but he wears a helmet rather than a crown. The imperial crown did not have this crest, of course, but the coins just kept replicating over and over and over this design, and this seemingly out-of-place crest just stuck there. Around the portrait, the legends once again follow the formula of the time. Dominus Noster, Justinianus, Perpetuus Augustus. On the reverse, we now have the letter kappa, representing the number 20, so 20 numi. Over and under the letter, we have control marks, and to the left and right, the marks of the regnal year. So to the left, anno, to the right, the number 37. Coins of Justinian come in all sizes. He enacted a small reform of bronze during his reign, greatly increasing its weight and revaluing it in relation to the gold coins. I won't get into details today, but maybe in a future video just about Justinian. Suffice it to say that in his long reign, coins were struck both in earlier side-facing portrait style and this new front-facing style. There must be some dedicated collectors of Justinian out there, since he was such an important historical character, and you can assemble a super diverse collection with lots of different types of busts, types of reverses. There's a lot to collect on Justinian alone. Okay, let's keep going. Now, onto a 10 numi piece. This coin is outstanding. Generally, when we get to these smaller fractional pieces, the design starts becoming quite crude, but this one is packed with details. For this one, we go a bit forward in time to the long, eventful reign of Heraclius, who reigned between 610 and 641 AD. Incredibly violent times. He came to power after ousting a tyrant, Phocas. He fought and defeated the Sasanians. Then he had to defend against the onslaught from the early Islamic campaigns, which took a lot of territory from the Byzantines. The reign of Heraclius was really interesting, and considering how many existential threats to the empire there were, he did alright, he did a good job. So, we have a front-facing portrait of the emperor, as per the new Byzantine style. Heraclius also holds the globe cruciger, and interesting change. Now the emperor has a beard. Since the times the empire converted to Christianity, all the way back in the 4th century, emperors had returned to an even older Roman tradition of being clean-shaven. Having beards was for barbarians, only letting maybe a short beard grow when they were in mourning for the passing of a family member. But as we can see here, the clean-shaven style had come out of fashion, and in the following centuries we will see some emperors being showed with some pretty spectacular beards. Another innovation introduced by Heraclius was to finally switch the official language of the empire from Latin to Greek. This wasn't really a very revolutionary idea or move on his part, but rather an official acceptance of the reality that the East, where the majority of the population lived, spoke Greek. Latin was by that time mostly an administrative and religious language, and we can see it on the legends on the coins, which slowly start replacing some of the Latin legends for Greek letters. Although the regnal name of the emperor, the sentence itself on the coin, is still in the Latin language, we can still read the Dominus Noster Heraclius Perpetuus Augustus. It's quite interesting. Once again, that administrative inertia I talked about. Coins have had its legends in Latin for centuries. They wouldn't change that easily. But Greek was finally seeping in. At first, just changing a few letters here and there, but eventually all of the legends would be in Greek. The reverse, in contrast, is visually simple. We have a Latin number 10, since this coin was struck in Thessalonica, in theory, a Western, Latin-speaking city of the empire. Yet, the city is today in the territory of modern Greece. It's a little bit ironic, and it's really complicated to wrap your head around this idea. Anyways, over the number 10, we have a control mark, a little cross, and on the right, the number 7 for the regnal year, meaning this coin was struck between 616 and 617 AD. Let's keep going. I mentioned there were coins struck in other denominations, different to the 40, 20, 10, 5 order. Here's one of such examples, a 12 Numi coin from Egypt. Egypt has always been a bit quirky, a bit unique numismatically. It always had a separate, closed monetary standard. That means no foreign coins could get into the country, nor could Egyptian coins leave. They all had to be exchanged at the border with official money changers. From the time of the Ptolemaic Greeks, when they introduced coins to Egypt, to most of the Roman period, that was the case. There was a brief period in the late Roman Empire when Egypt was finally integrated into the larger monetary system. However, during the Byzantine period, I feel like it once again became a closed monetary system, at least for the bronze coins. And why did they do this? Well, there are different theories. I personally think, for example, the Ptolemies, all the way back into the 4th, 3rd century BC, did it as a source of silver to the imperial coffers. Silver was very scarce in the country, and the Mediterranean world mostly used silver as money, so this was a way for the royal treasury to accumulate silver and transact with this silver-using Mediterranean world. Now, the Romans and the Byzantines maybe did it a little bit differently. They probably kept the system in place more as a way to control and direct the Egyptian economy. The province was huge, it had a very large population, and it was a strategic province for the mountain of grain it produced. It produced a lot of food. Rome and later Constantinople were fed by Egyptian grain. And one of the best ways to control the economy, to do what you want, in this case produce grain, was to hold a tight control over its money. Not a good thing for the freedom of the Egyptian people, but I suspect this was not a major concern for the emperors. Alright, so what do we have here? We have a 12 Numi coin from Emperor Heraclius once again. This was a piece struck later in his reign, probably between 632 and 638. There are no regnal years marked in these coins, but we can extrapolate the dates from the three figures on the obverse. Paying attention to the imagery on Byzantine coins is particularly important. This piece might look crude compared to earlier coins, but the Romans never left unnecessary information out of their coins. We have Heraclius at the center, to the right his elder son and junior co-emperor Heraclius Constantine, and to his left his youngest son Heraclonas. We know that Heraclonas was elevated to Caesar in 632 and as co-emperor in 638. If we look closer, we can see Heraclius and his elder son have a crown with a little cross attached to it over their heads. Heraclonas does not. He has a cross over his head, but not a crown. This is like a floating cross. It's not attached to his head. What we can infer from that this coin was made when he was a Caesar, so after 632, but before he became emperor in 638. I need to admit it. At first, I was dismissive of Byzantine coins for their style, but the more I realized even humble coins like this one had lots of thought put out in their imagery, I now respect more Byzantine coins. On the reverse, we have the denomination mark, a iota and a beta, representing 10 and 2, so 12 Numi. Between the two letters, we have a couple of control marks for that issue, and under it, the abbreviation Alex for Alexandria. A few years after this coin was made, Alexandria and the entire province of Egypt would fall to the Muslims. There would be some back and forth in the coming years, but at the end, the Muslims prevailed and Egypt was permanently lost. The Byzantines had to rely on other provinces, such as their possessions in what is modern-day Crimea, to produce the grain they needed to feed their cities, now that Egypt was not available for them. Alright, let's keep going. Another coin. We're getting there. Smallest denominations. Now let's look at a pentanumium, a 5 Numi piece. Tiny little thing. These generally weigh around 2.5 grams only. We once again have Anastasius. This is one from his first issues after the monetary reform. And as we can see, we are back to that very traditional late Roman style, with the emperor looking to the right, wearing the jeweled diadem and the cloak with the brooch. This is in fact so tiny that there isn't enough space to spell out the emperor's name in this coin. So in the legends, we have Dominus Noster Annas Perpetuus Augustus. Such a small coin really makes me wonder just how much could this thing realistically buy. Pentanumi like these are incredibly common. If you look into a pick bean at a coin show, it's quite likely you will find a few of these. If they were a little bit scarce, like a coin I'm going to show you next, we could make an argument that these were so insignificant in their purchasing power that they were made more as a convenience piece, meant to round up change for very small transactions. So the fact they were made in such huge numbers probably implies they were used by most people, and they were used a lot. Still, in order to make a solidus, we would need 2,880 of these coins. That's a lot of coins. That makes me believe you couldn't really buy anything with just one of these. The basic necessities of life would have been purchased with a small bunch of pentanumi, 3 or 4 for a cheap cup of wine at a tavern, maybe a small loaf of bread or a handful of olives. And if you bought your groceries for the week and wanted to pay using only these coins, you would probably get a frustrated look from the vendor who would have had to count a bag full of these pentanumi, like if you tried paying for your groceries today with only dimes and nickels. The reverse is once again highly functional. We have a huge epsilon representing the number 5, and, well, there isn't much space left for anything else here. To the right, we have a small symbol for the workshop where this piece was made, in this case an alpha, so the first workshop of Constantinople, and we have a couple of dots around the epsilon, probably another type of control mark for this issue. This reverse is particularly simple, but there are some fun pentanumi reverse types for these small denominations with like crosses, different workshop letters, religious symbols. Someone could make a really fun and affordable collection just with pentanumi. And finally, we get to our last coin of today. Look at this little guy, it's so adorable. Here we have a pre-reform numus from Anastasius. Imagine exchanging one gold solidus for 7,200 of these. You either had a super valuable gold coin or this. So inefficient. When Anastasius reformed the monetary system, the mountains of these numi that were around in circulation, they were allowed to keep circulating after the reform, being retariffed at 2.5 numi. You could think of these as like half pentanumi. Being a pre-reform coin, this piece is dated between 491 and 498 AD. On the obverse, well, there isn't much space to show anything, so we have a cute little portrait of the emperor with a remarkable level of detail for such a small flan. We can make out all of the details: the cloak, the hair, the diadem, eyes, mouth, and a gigantic nose. Of course, no space for any legends. Also, notice how this coin looks remarkably yellow. Whoever cleaned this coin probably had to strip the patina off, revealing the bare metal underneath. We would expect the metal to be red, right, for the copper. Instead, here we have something called aes plumbatum, an alloy of copper and lead mixed in, which made these coins cheaper to produce, and the metal was softer, allowing each die to strike more coins before they had to be thrown away. You know, it was a nice little cost-saving measure to make the production of these more efficient, and it gave the coin this yellowish hue. On the reverse, we have a monogram of the emperor. Monograms are a composition of all of the letters of one's name in a compact symbol. So for Anastasius, this symbol we have here combines the letters A, N, S, T, I, and U. Well, V in this case. They even added a little circular pattern around the monogram to fill out the reverse a bit more. This coin is adorable. It's so small but so full of detail. I loved doing research for this video. It helped me delve into this wonderful and criminally underappreciated part of ancient numismatics, which is Byzantine coins. What I liked the most was seeing how it continued for quite a few years the late Roman visual style, slowly transitioning to something unique to the Byzantines. Even though some things, such as the legends in Latin, persisted on and on for centuries, they were really stubborn to change some stuff. If Byzantine institutions and their culture changed as slowly as the style on their coins did, it's no surprise they just kept calling themselves the Romans for 1,000 years. The cultural shifts would have been so gentle, so subtle, so stretched out throughout the centuries that people wouldn't even have noticed. They would have called themselves Romans. God bless the Eastern Roman Empire. So what about you? Have you got any Byzantine coins? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.